Welcome back to the National Post Politics Bureau, where, Chris, it's the day after the big budget vote, and we are not going to the polls.
You know who's the happiest
Thank
about
God.
that? You know who's the happiest about that? Every media organization,
it's me and you.
finance department, every finance department at every media organization is like, wait.
Yeah. Usually we try to be unbiased, but we're pretty happy. I guess my question to you, Chris, is there was a lot of talk about potential election. Was that ever really a chance that that would happen?
Well, what's interesting about minority governments is that mistakes happen, right?
Yeah.
They're all the more unlikely now in the hybrid voting era. So we know, back in the day, MPs had to be like in the vicinity of the House of Commons so that if a snap confidence vote was called, they'd literally run back and they had like 10 minutes to do it and had to be sitting in their chair when the vote started. But now, since the pandemic, they have the option of voting by phone. They have 10 minutes, they fire up an app, it scans their face to make sure it's them, they vote, and it's done.
Yeah.
And so that has obviously drastically diminished the possibility of at least a snap election where literal sprinting to the House of Commons. That being said, in a case in this one where parties were keeping their cards very close to their chest until the very end, and where there was talk of them relying on abstentions of votes or people being like in an airplane and not being able to vote, that was all the rumoring before. Anything can happen. An MP could decide, I will vote, or an MP can forget that they weren't supposed to vote, or extra MPs on the Liberal side could forget. There's like all sorts of kind of silly things that make it that an election could be called. So fundamentally, was there really a chance? I think if everything followed the plan that each party or each individual had set, no. It would seem very unlikely because no one really seems to want an election.
Yeah.
But again, mistakes happen, things happen, and in a parliament where Mark Carney is 2 seats away from a majority, so it doesn't have them. 2 seats is a lot when you think if you need abstentions and all that.
Yeah, and one of the things going on here too is the Liberals have a pretty strong hand. So they have 2 seats to a majority, and they're also polling really well. They're pretty much neck and neck with the Conservatives, but Mark Carney's personal approvals are still very high.
Yeah.
And if anyone wanted an election, I would think it would be the Liberals. So do you think that what we were seeing here was all just posturing all along?
It certainly felt like it. It's an interesting moment for a parliamentary reporter covering will or will not a minority government fall, because it's probably one of the most posturing-full moments. Every party will almost never tell you explicitly what they're thinking unless it's very clear. Bloc Québécois, for example, has been abundantly clear
no
from
BS
the start. They're not going to support the budget. That was that's like 20 odd MPs that the Carney government knew that they couldn't rely on for support, and that was done. But for the rest of it, the NDP, especially not being an official party and not, being a very kind of loose organization of 7 or 8 individuals, they were harder to read because you almost had to go to every single one of them individually and be like, what's up? And then the Conservatives, there had been 2 kind of confidence votes on sub-amendments to the budget leading up to Monday evening, and they had brought some forward, but then also some of their MPs didn't vote on them, making those confidence votes from a couple weeks ago also fail. So I have to say that we've been speculating a lot about this because the Liberals had kind of thrown out weeks ago that they weren't sure that the budget would pass and they were worried about it, but all of it really is parties trying to paint others into a corner to get more from them that they want. The Liberals saying, we might go into an election, was clearly to force some oppositions to either negotiate with them or simply reveal their hands. And no one wanted to do it leading up to Monday evening. We were like, what's going to happen?
Yeah. And I mean, in defense of us, journalists, I always go to Polymarket. This is the predictions market. It says 5% chance of an election happening this year. Presumably that relates to the budget confidence vote.
Yeah.
But as a journalist, you kind of have to remain open to unlikely but possible things because you might look really silly if they do happen. And
crazy things happen.
95% means that 1 in 20 times it happens.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe we should have been more skeptical coming into this, or do you think that we have the Joe Clark example? Michael Chong was one of the MPs who couldn't vote in the last one.
Yeah.
He said the app was glitchy for him. So there still is a chance for mistakes here.
Yeah, whether the app was glitchy or not, we'll also never know.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's a government app, so glitches happen.
Arrive can't ask.
Exactly. But, I think that you were talking about 1 in 20, right? 5% thought that this would happen. I think if you'd polled the Hill reporters, 1 in 20 would have told you an election was going to happen, right? Was possible. We always are wary because, again, mistakes happen, governments fall. You just have to think back to past elections where it's like total flukes. Oppositions were able to jump in pre-hybrid voting and get a vote where the Liberals or the government wasn't ready, and boom, you're in an election. So truthfully, it's when you think the real reason I think a lot of people would have said an election was unlikely was because if you looked at the roster of oppositions, very few of them find the idea of an election right now enticing. Pierre Poilievre, as we know, the Conservatives just went through 2 weeks of very difficult headlines for them. They lost an MP, a floor crosser with the Liberals. Another one announced he wasn't running, and then there was this whole speculation within and outside of the Conservative Party about if more MPs might leave the party. So Pierre Poilievre had to hunker down and figure out his own affairs before calling for an election. And as we know, when Pierre Poilievre wants an election, he calls for an election. Last year, at this exact time last year, he was beating every drum possible for an election, right?
Carbon tax election.
Carbon tax election under Justin Trudeau. And the NDP, well, it doesn't have official party status, but also doesn't have a leader. They're in the middle of a leadership race. They're kind of a disconnected group of people with an interim leader that doesn't, communicate a real sense of leadership, in the sense that Don Davies, the interim leader, really kind of acts like he's like, I'm here as a placeholder, but I'm not controlling or cracking down on caucus like an elected leader would. So when you get a sense that no one's really joshing or calling for an election, you really have to suspect that no one wants one, and thus will make efforts not to make one happen.
Okay. Well, thanks, Chris. And we'll see you next time there's a confidence vote. Thanks for joining us.